be the backbone to our surveying a splendid mess of facts and kick out solutions. And so I'll be interested in our discussion of hearing whether people have identified that area here. I know besides legal research, the other real success story, to go back to Catherine's introductory slide, is really e-discovery. And I think we're quite a ways away from having this be the result from e-discovery or the metaphoric equivalent of this here. But I do, again, keeping consistent with the way I've approached this, I'm interested in this because I do think eventually, and the question is when, but eventually we are going to be at a point where we need, as a profession, to worry about the disruptive innovation. This is Clayton Christensen, who regrettably died last year, but wrote The Innovator's Dilemma. He's a big theorist. I was surprised to find in 2012 that he came out and actually addressed the profession of law specifically. It wasn't fully directed by AI, but he talked about how ripe for disruption the industry is, in part because we have a return on sort of our margin, our profit margin in law is tremendously higher than most businesses and most professions. So he looked at that, identified it, and just for those who aren't familiar with his theories, he looked at the auto industry, big steel, and identified factors that allowed the lower cost providers to come in and to compete and really cannibalize the market from the bottom up. But let's stress that bottom up, because I think that may be the transformational opportunity here, where what we're looking for from AI under the innovator's dilemma, sort of their disruptive innovation theory, is good enough. Results that are available. And I think that's going to be the transformation here. It's not so much the AmLaw 200 or criminal defense lawyers who need to be concerned about being disrupted in the next decade, 20 years even. It's going to be the prevalence of legal solutions available to people who have been under or unlawyered. And so that's probably not going to be in criminal justice, but it is going to be available in things like immigration law. There are some terrific applications that make that possible, where they're reducing the cost, increasing the certainty here. And so I see that as possible. I got a preview of Bob's slide deck. He's got a terrific example. I'm not going to spoil, but my face lit up when I was flipping through his slides and recognized the opportunities in different fields that are available that I don't normally think of. And Catherine wrote an article with her team at Incubator Lab that got published. It was in the context of the pandemic, but it looked using Kira at, and this actually resonates because Roger, I don't know if it was by chance or sort of, but he selected force majeure as he was looking through from the database of contracts, and they went in and studied those and concluded that, well, there are a variety of different instances where force majeure did take care of it. It did an analysis of that stack of contracts that they were able to access and run through. But the other example, and the one that I wanted to call out in this article, was the example of how IBM had used it to prepare the way in due diligence for a big acquisition. And before they had decided to turn loose an AI solution on that stack of contracts through due diligence, they thought they were going to sample the contracts. They knew there was a tight timeline. They weren't going to be able to get to everything. They had estimated that they were going to have 1 million contracts available for review that they were going to need to get through. Turned out, by using AI, they were able to get through a tremendous number of them. They determined that there were actually 4 million contracts there. And that's a theme that I think we need to keep in mind when I say that that's going to be the transformation, because most businesses have an awful lot of law that doesn't even reach the general counsel's office. And those are the companies that have the general counsel's office. I think for businesses, and again, I'm a transactional lawyer, so that's how I think of it primarily, those are tremendous opportunities. And I think some of the smartest work that's being done now with AI is trying to prioritize a screening to help counsel and companies determine whether a contract is even worth negotiating or whether it's good enough. whether it's going to be able to meet that threshold of nothing here is a tremendous exposure of risk here, or here you should focus on indemnification and insurance, this risk of loss. The rest of this isn't likely going to matter. The UCC takes care of this. And I think that's the sort of use that AI is going to enable that's really going to be powerful for companies, but then also by extension is also going to be available. One of the examples is, and I suspect most of us have seen this in the news, a couple years ago, there was an app available to help you fight parking tickets. And it was tremendously powerful and it was free. And so, think about that. That's the other theme I want to hit as we go back to that Bricket, the app that let you, gave you instructions for assembling Legos. It's free. It's almost instantaneous. And it's really good. Wow. I mean, what more could, if you're really talking about disruption, what more could you ask than cheap, fast, and better than you've got now? And the answer is, well, more broad adoption. So again, I do think AI is going to be transformational. The question is when. And my remarks sort of going forward are not yet, at least not from a transactional lawyer's perspective. Witness the example Watson here. This is actually a slide from backstage of the Jeopardy in 2011. So when I say not yet, in 2011, the stories were already starting to hit that Watson was going to revolutionize medicine. It was going to revolutionize law. In 2014, Ross Intelligence was born with a backbone on Watson. They just went bankrupt in December 2020 because they got crosswise with Thomson Reuters. Catherine, I think Baker Hostetler was their first customer, Ross Intelligence first customer. We haven't had a chance to chat about what your experience was like, but it's a fabulous product, super smart people. Andrew, one of the co-founders, an evangelist for this, and they weren't able to make this a ghost commercially. And I think that's a powerful lesson for how hard this is in the transactional space. Having a great idea with a great product is not enough. And so that's where I liked some of the slides that we've already seen. And really one of the reasons I think the barriers was the answer was in Catherine's slide about time. And one of the real challenges here is to get busy professionals engaged in solving tomorrow's problem today, where we've all got enough on the plate. So that's kind of what I'm seeing here. But as we look here, that's I wanted to introduce Watson because I think that was a metaphor for what we were expecting to happen soon. And you see the 2014 when Ross Intelligence was founded, and they really did talk about robot lawyers putting regular lawyers out of business. They're out of business. And that's by no means unique. You look at the number of different transactions of alternative legal service providers and what a tremendous difficulty they've had in gaining traction as they reform. And again, my prism is autonomous vehicles, and we're seeing the same thing there, which is this last mile problem is very difficult. And so you've got products that are kind of sort of useful. If you squint, you can see, oh, that would be terrific. But the execution, for a variety of reasons, and I hope in our discussion we can get into this, is just not there. It's not useful. So the reason I wanted to return to Roger's slide with the Kira, which was the business analytics, the contracts analytics program that he chose, that he selected that force majeure. I demoed this past spring an artificial intelligence program that's supposed to be a contracts, and I don't want to call them out, but it's a contracts analytics program. And for the last 20 years, I've been working with one client in particular, very high value contracts. We have 135 of them in place. So I've got a pretty good database, and I have been the sole drafter of those contracts. So I also have a very good database in my head about what's in there. So I thought, okay, pilot project, this is going to be a tremendous opportunity for me to learn what is inconsistent in those contracts. I think I've been consistent over the last 15 years. I wonder what I'm going to find out. So I loaded them in, and that's, that was not a hard lift. there, but it is one of the themes here is what is your sort of your pool of contracts to explore. And I loaded them in and I was flabbergasted to find that it couldn't identify clauses that had virtually the same heading with more than a 50% accuracy. And these were all based on one form contract I had drafted 15 years ago, and I was 100% confident. And as I was working with the trainers, I realized, oh, so these trainers have some magic, but this is by no means natural language. There is a real art to causing this contracts analytics when, and I'm not talking about force majeure where they've got enough of a database, enough of a different, but these are language that was very similar. And so they said, well, okay, but you just manage your expectations, you're going to have to train it. So I went through, identified the provision in all of the contracts for it and said, okay, so I've trained it. Let me try a different one. It couldn't get it. It kept choking on these examples. And so I became skeptical about where we're at because of the formidable ask. Those language patterns seem like they're going to work, and they're tremendous pieces of software that are available where it looks like it's working. But to go to Roger's slide, it's that black box. And if I had not known that data set, those group of contracts backwards and forwards, if I hadn't been the drafter, I would have easily come away believing that those provisions simply didn't exist. And so that's going to be the question here is how much is good enough for a transactional lawyer? If I'm working on an M&A deal and I want to have my due diligence scanned and, at some point, again, remember what Sundar said about the tremendous power. This is going to be like fire or lightning or something. There should be some magic here where I ought to be able to put my due diligence database, all these contracts in there and have it kick out schedules. And maybe I've got to review it, but a conflicts provision where it comes in and lists all the different assignment clauses that this is going to violate without consent. That doesn't seem to me like an unreasonable ask, but I will tell you that if you were to rely on that, you would not be reaching your duty of care because it's going to choke on that. So we've got a long way to go in the software, in the contracts analytics before we're reaching a point where we're going to feel comfortable turning it loose. It's useful, but there's this appearance of competence that I think is belied by at least my own experience here. And that's without focusing on, again, to Catherine's point, the time element, because the other reason that we decided not to move forward with that was really our realization that it was going to be a tremendous investment in time and learning how to use this software, and that wasn't going to scale. So then when we taught an associate, when they walked or got promoted and moved beyond due diligence, that intellectual experience was going to have to be replicated from ground zero with that new associate. So these are practical problems that I think we're going to have as we see AI try to take over sort of big law. And again, leaving aside what I think is going to happen is that disruptive innovation where people who are under or unlawyered are going to be able to use this. And by way of example, I'll just mention that LegalZoom just went public. IPO, tremendous valuation, above what they were targeting. But in digging into that and wondering what their experience was, I was shocked to learn that 10% of the LLCs in the country are formed by LegalZoom, which I think tells you how under-lawyered that population of entrepreneurs are. And really the sweet spot here, that is the disruptive innovation, is coming in and giving people who wouldn't otherwise have a lawyer a very low cost, competent, not artful solution to a legal problem. So, but here's the metaphor. This exoskeleton is powered some way, and I couldn't really figure it out, by artificial intelligence, but that's where I feel like we are with artificial intelligence now when it works in law, is it turns the lawyer into a superhero. They can do things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do better, faster, but not cheaper. But they can really do things, but it isn't scaling. It is really left to the single lawyer doing something better, which then suggests who some of the winners right now are here. And so what my own experience has been is that the sole practitioner small firms are aided greatly by AI that's available for the transactional lawyer because they've got access to the same forms file that we do, the same contracts, analytics products, because the pricing on these has come down to where it's really quite cost effective. They can avoid having to hire a bunch of contract lawyers or associates to do a big deal. They can get a data dump and due diligence and be able to work through it as if they had the full source. But what they're not able to do is to move beyond that. It's not scaling up in the same way, but by the same token, I am not really advantaged by having this because the highest I can get is to a 1-to-1 ratio, which, sort of understand law firm economics. What I'd actually like to be doing is using associates and have that leverage going back over the last 100 years, where that's where the real profits come from, the most profitable law firms. And it's reducing that ability to do it. So that's one of the changes here in the profession. I think we're going to start to see. It's a little bit wonky now because everyone in the deal world has been so busy post-pandemic. Not that we're beyond the pandemic, but really beginning June 2020, all of a sudden deal speed started to queue up. And I think that's really blurred because we've seen a lot of progress in the last year in artificial intelligence for the business transactional lawyer. But we haven't had to test that yet, but that's my prediction for where that's going to head. I wanted to focus on this because it's not a book recommendation, but it is an interesting book that came out this spring by a fellow who is a private equity investor who invests only, his firm, Zeta Capital, only invests in artificial intelligence companies. And the reason I wanted to focus this is because it points really where I'm seeing the limitations. It isn't, as he's explaining, the real value of artificial intelligence. It isn't to turn a single lawyer into a super lawyer. It's to build that, he calls them loops instead of network effects, but really to capitalize so you keep getting a better and better product. And I think that's right. And that's where we need to see artificial intelligence head, to where when you're using it, it isn't that I can do my job better. It's that the system itself starts to take the input, to remember it, to use it to build better and better, sort of the network nodes of a neural network, something like that. And so that's where I really wanted to focus the discussion when we talk about artificial intelligence in the law. I see it right now in really every application I've demoed, from e-discovery to Brevia or Kira, Luminance, one of those document review softwares, for want of a better word, is that they're very high level. And so they do work like a super good search and replace. They can identify it, but they are not. And some of this is because of the ethics, where they can't really share the database there, but it isn't as if the next time you turn to a transaction, you can sort of tell it to remember what it is you taught it, but that's pretty limited. And it's not building, to use an example of Tesla from my other life, when a Tesla car drives on a highway, that information is available to every subsequent owner. That's part of why it might be that full self-driving could eventually work, is because they're building on the experience. The system itself is learning. And I don't see that in a very robust sense in the artificial intelligence in the law right now. So, where does that leave us? Are we at the royal typewriter? I think we are. I mean, the truth is, when you look at a lot of these products, it looks a lot like when I started practicing law 27 years ago now, when someone couldn't afford to hire a lawyer for a bespoke contract before word processors were really au courant, they went to the form shop, the print shop, and bought, a pre-printed legal form, something like that. If you look at the language of Bloomberg Law that just released a new product, actually, but Practical Law, which is Westlaw's, one of its premier marketing gambits, is it's really just word processing forms available more readily. That has a tremendous cost. Not only is that a pretty low level of artificial intelligence, it also means what we're seeing here is the forms that are being made available to those sole practitioners, those small lawyers, small firm lawyers that I was mentioning, are from publicly traded companies' deal files. They pull their examples almost exclusively, and it's hard to get them to admit because they all say, well, we have some proprietary data from private company sources, but I've really tried to dig in and identify, because it would be tremendously useful to me if I could access this private company data, and it's just not there. So instead, what you've got are the largest, most complex deals with the most complex contracts driving deal work now across the middle market and lower middle market deals. You know, I'd laugh because about 1 out of 5 deals, I can identify the source of the other side's initial offer on the contract is coming from Practical Law. And if they've had a second year associate do it, I can also see how they don't even know how to tailor the deal. And I think that's what's going to happen increasingly is, and the term we use in artificial intelligence for this is really bias. And just to put a name on it, it is the bias of the data set that is driving the artificial intelligence development here in law for many of the different fields, and it is heavily skewed to expensive, big law, publicly available documents. And that has a huge cost. So when we talk about costs of providing legal services coming down, it's going to take a long time before we see that, because even as due diligence becomes more efficient, you're going to have to slog through literally a 50-page single-spaced contract and a $25 million asset purchase agreement, and it was 50 pages. Just last week I received it. This is nuts. When I started practicing with this Royal, it wasn't literally a Royal typewriter, of course. I did have a word processor, but I carried the floppy disk, and it wasn't one of those cool 3.5-inch floppy disks. It was the bigger 5.25-inch floppy disk to my secretary, who printed it out, and we were limited to the changes we could make. So we had tighter documents, and I think that's really what we're experiencing here with the availability through, and I almost don't want to call it artificial intelligence, but the companies that market themselves as being based on artificial intelligence are just scraping publicly available documents that are frankly inapplicable to most deals that the people who are using them are employing them on. Where do I see artificial intelligence being used well? If I look at our accounting or bookkeeping profession, interestingly, they're way ahead of us. And maybe this shouldn't be a surprise, since the big 4 accounting firms are way in front of the law firms by and large, and Baker Hostetler is an exception, Wilson Sonsini. There are law firms that are really moving forward, trying to be smart. But by and large, most of the legal profession, certainly in the AmLaw 200, they may announce some sort of innovation product, but it's very light. They don't know what they're doing, but they want to make sure they're going forward. But here, these are very cheap bookkeeping providers that allow you to just, it's almost like QuickBooks, but it's online. And okay, so that's cheaper, it's more readily available. That doesn't sound transformative until you step back and realize what that allows these companies that use these services to do. They can then pay an accountant to come in and only provide the highest touch work that's necessary to that. They can also set up alerts that trigger, when they need to involve this. Their tax returns can be sort of filled in automatically using artificial intelligence. It can queue you because it's got all the underlying data here. It can queue you for deductions. So it's really, a super smart tax return product as well, that's wrapped under just a bookkeeping function, and it allows this functionality to be much enhanced. And to my point, it's getting smarter and smarter and smarter. It's using those examples. When they see something that works, it's able to build that in. And so the systems get better and better, both on a company basis, customer, and then across the overall product. So, that's where I think that's the standard we need to hold law to. And I don't think we're getting anywhere near there yet. I did want to call out some of the exceptions to this. This young woman, Bahar Ansari, is an immigration lawyer. She's fresh out of, well, out of law school, sounds fresh to me, but 5 years out of law school, this is her second company. She's able to provide immigration law services across 21 different subfields for 75% less cost, much more quick. So this is lawyer is superhero, but it's also democratizing the law. But then because of how she's doing it, her system gets better and better. It's really an application where you are seeing actual artificial intelligence, where she's learning to divine from that. Another example I wanted to cite was ClearBrief, product that came out of a sole practitioner in Seattle who actually developed it after a pro bono case. And it's this terrific bit of software where you put your brief into Word, upload it along with the case file, the supporting documents, as well as the case citations, and it'll go through the record that's available and identify where you could use better factual support and suggest those items to you. And if you think about how that's going to help people draft better, think better, I'd suggest that's really pretty cool. So, last slide here, and I think Catherine did a better job of grabbing logos, because what struck me as I was putting together this slide was how black and how all of these are the same shape. So, and I wanted to show this, though, to show kind of the variety of different people here. Cooley, that's the Cooley law firm that's putting this out. They have forms available on the internet for free that you can go grab in a venture capital environment. 650 is a Wilson Sonsini product where they are providing legal services that their clients don't want to pay for through a subsidiary that's based in Salt Lake City. They responded to the pandemic and put out the employment law manual, made it available across all 50 states, have it automatically updating. So when laws change, those employment manuals are available, and they targeted it at a price point that's very affordable. Those are the sort of applications that I think have real promise. So with that, I think I've reached my 15 minutes and then some, but that's my perspective. A tremendous possibility here. We're not there yet. And I'm not sure how many different providers are really thinking in a way of providing it to where we are going to get there.
Todd, thank you so much. I think that the lack of wow factor or being underwhelmed is an important factor here. So I have a lot of questions that I want to present to the group when we get to that point to talk about why is that. Certainly legal industry is a high dose of what I would consider a unstructured textual problem that's harder for machine learning than it would be for like bookkeeping that has a more structured data. That is just a little bit of what I want to kind of get into when we start to talk about, why are we not seeing the wow factor? How long is that going to take when we get there? But before we do get into some questions, and I can see some questions already on the chat, so I appreciate that. Bob, I want to pass it over to you because there's, a heavy dose of reality when it comes to bias, when it comes to ethical obligations and issues that we're going to run into as AI is interfacing with the law. So I'll pass it to you.
Great. I'm going to try to, I think I'm going to have to cut this just so we can have some time, but let me make sure we're here. So let me just give a little bit of easier background here. What is AI? And we kind of danced around that, but it's just the science of making computers do tasks requiring intelligence when humans perform this. You're essentially just replicating what a human being is doing. So if you've got a document automation product like a LegalZoom, instead of having a lawyer do it, you have a computer interview the client, get the necessary information, prepare the documents. So you have a when we talk about AI, you have very simple tools like that, and then you have the tools that can analyze what judges are doing, the likelihood of success, that have what we call machine learning, something much deeper. And if you look at the full range of AI, and this is a nice a summary of that. You've got machine learning, you've got speech, you've got vision, i.e., you've got, when you're talking about facial recognition, you see it in robotics, expert systems, which I'm going to be talking about briefly, and then a lot of natural language processing. And my hero in the AI area and talking about the future of the law is Richard Susskind, and he's been in this game probably longer than anyone else. And he really talks about drivers for change. Okay, what we haven't talked about is the unmet legal need of the vast majority of Americans who just cannot afford legal services. You know, I've seen statistics that suggest 80% of the public with legal needs cannot meet those needs because they cannot afford it. And then on the higher end, you've got corporations who are vastly ahead of where law firms are, who are used to seeing things done using technology, that are trying to force those drivers for change. And one of the obstacles, or the biggest obstacles to change, and I'm very familiar with LegalZoom, Rocket Lawyer, and Avo in my role at the ABA. States were very resistant using unauthorized practice of law, statutes, and ethical rules to try to block the efforts by non-alternative legal services providers like LegalZoom getting into the industry, because by and large, you absolutely cannot have outside ownership of law firms. Lawyers have to own the law firms, and we don't have the kind of business model that's built for innovation. And we are now seeing experiments like with my friend Jason Velez and DocuBot and OneLaw. He was the first company that was allowed into the Utah sandbox, and Arizona's created similar opportunities where we're looking at, in order to close the justice gap, we're looking at innovation, particularly forms of AI, in order to meet that unmet legal need. And so alternative legal services providers are being sanctioned and embraced, where in the past we were stopping them from getting into the legal profession. And that's because the last driver of change is the legal profession has been very, very slow to embrace technology. And so the more technology that there is, the more that we will accept it and the more we'll be forced to use it. I'm going to skip this slide. I'm going to talk about expert legal systems, expert systems in the law. Most of what we've been talking about are in fact expert systems in the law, where we're simply taking these legal reasoning and then we're using machines, training machines, in order to do work that would normally be done by lawyers. And Susskind has this spectrum, and I think Todd talked about this. Todd's kind of on the bespoke end, the end where you really do need lawyers to address the concerns of large clients. Most of us who are working in the access to justice space are dealing with clients who really are dealing with commoditized legal issues on the far right. Most of us, I don't see why we couldn't create a will by simply asking questions or answering questions and having the will spit it out. And LegalZoom has probably created millions of those, right? We talk about their dominance in the creation of LLCs, but most basic legal documents, machines can do them, and machines can do them well. And the example that I like to use is TurboTax. TurboTax, it takes that vast set of laws that govern taxation, both for corporations and for individuals, and somehow makes it accessible to everyone by simply creating a Q&A, ask questions, get the information, and then spitting out a tax return very specific to your situation. And I believe, and I think Susskind believes, that to the extent that we can take, however complex the law is, situations where we can deconstruct what a lawyer might do and have a computer do it, we can create situations where we don't need lawyers to do that. And why is that important? I'm not trying to put Todd out of business. What I'm trying to do is to provide legal services to those people who can't afford it at all, or who can't afford it at the rates that the market presently requires. I'm going to skip my friend Oliver Goodenough's um, guide to computational law, and what he basically does is he explains where all of this AI falls. But this is a good illustration of how an expert system works. You're really just taking if-then situations and applying law to it. So let's take Todd's example of creating documents. When he has a document template, he knows that there's information that he will need that's particular to a client, and that the vast majority of what he's going to propose for the client is based on the wealth of experience he's had in prior deals that he's going to recommend that his client needs to include in a contract document. So Todd would be that knowledge expert, and then he would provide the information to the system that said, we're going to spit out a contract based on this form, and I want you to find out the information that's particular to the client. And then this rules-based system will get the information from the non-expert user, and you'll have an answer, whether it's Josh Browder's Do Not Pay. That's the software that create what he calls the robot lawyer, where he basically says, generic to every one of the situations that I'm going to deal with, and he deals with many, many more situations than just parking tickets. I think that I will just get this amount of information from the client and then get this result. That's what an expert legal system is. There's no magic to it. I know that A to J author system put out by my friend John Mayer, not the singer, but the executive director of Cali, has been used millions of times by legal aid societies, by law firms to create these Q&A systems that spit out legal documents for clients all across America. And they do that for free. I'm going to skip this discussion what this rules-based system are. And I do talk about a few of these systems. DocuBot, my friend Jason Velez, has a very simple chatbot creator, not just for document automation, but really for many legal situations. And all the DocuBot really does is to say, I'm going to ask a certain number of questions that I know will get me where I need to go to answer this question for the client in this particular area. And if I can't answer that question, the last thing that my bot is going to say is, I'll have to refer you to a human being. In my work, I've taught about 16 different legal app development classes, and I've used DocuBot in half of those to teach students how they can take whatever limited expertise they have in the law and to give legal advice using technology. And it's not nearly as difficult as you might think. Now, we have the higher end AIs that Roger and Todd have already talked about, that you see in Westlaw Edge and Rowan, in the due diligence products, in the prediction technology. And I wouldn't put Josh Browder's Do Not Pay into the same category, but it has the potential to reach vastly more people and to serve that access to justice field. And if you see Josh interviewed, he'll say his goal is ultimately to replace lawyers, to disrupt the legal profession in such a way that we won't need lawyers. That's not likely to happen, if ever, anytime soon. In my own experience, and again, in the interest of time, I'm trying to allow us enough time to have the Q&A. What I'm experimenting with is to use AI in the criminal and social justice field in my work at Southern University, where we'll identify areas of the law where we think that we can get access to data and then use AI in order to create better results for, in this case, African Americans. And I had a number of these different examples, but I'm just going to use one because of the limited time. We developed a technology called Easy Plea long before the pandemic. This was about 2.5, 3 years ago, and the Louisiana Supreme Court asked us to create a pilot project. We started and we failed because we couldn't get a state's attorney that was willing to work with us. But essentially what Easy Plea was using online dispute resolution technology, and that just means Zoom, where you would get the lawyers together very early in the case. And because of the convenience of Zoom technology, if you could get the public defender and the state's attorney to work together and agree to use the platform, you could document every single plea bargain. And if you could get endorsement throughout the state so that you use the same system, you could develop a machine learning system that would take all of the data, store it, and use machine learning to generate recommendations for both sides to see where they fall. So it's a very simple concept. If you have 20 different data points for a particular crime and for a particular defendant, regardless of that person's race, age, socioeconomic level, you ought to be able to say, here's a fair outcome. But more importantly, you'd be able to be more transparent about what's happening to the poor, to African Americans, and be able to do something with that data. And at the end of the day, it's kind of it was our effort to kind of do just the opposite of what we were seeing was happening with algorithmic bias, which Roger talks about. An algorithm is simply any set of rules to create an outcome. And we use algorithms in our daily lives. It doesn't have to be computer-based, but the term was picked up in the computer world. And unfortunately, what happens is, because we have our own biases, programmers, when they're programming a platform, or they're choosing data to educate that platform that the platform will learn, we have problems with algorithmic bias. Last summer, algorithmic bias was a big issue when law enforcement was using facial recognition to identify protesters in the Black Lives Matter marches, and we learned that AI programs had a problem identifying African American women. We had a big problem in the sentencing software that's used by all federal judges, when we found that there was algorithmic bias in the system, because we had two people committing the same offenses from similar backgrounds, and the only distinction was their race, that we were getting different results. So what we're trying to do, at least at my school, is to kind of take the opposite approach. How can we use AI in its simplest forms in order to develop expert legal systems to combat bias? And I'm going to stop there because we're almost out of time for questions, and I had to rush through that. But if anybody's interested, we can ask some questions.
Well, Bob, thank you so much. I think there's just a lot on the table right now. I want to tackle real quickly, thank you for that, for all the panelists. It has generated so much thought and energy. I want to really quickly tackle Brendan's question. And I think this is kind of a question around whether or not we're leveling the playing field, so to speak, by using AI. And specifically, his question is around, is it a zero-sum game if litigating lawyers search dockets, find the artful pleadings and motions, use and learn those to make more suitable pleadings? And in the meantime, or in the medium term, will there be different winners or losers? And I think this goes back a little bit, Todd, to what you were talking about. And maybe AI is going to be more beneficial, thinking of the person with the exoskeleton, to help hold up some of those smaller firms versus some of the large law firms. So, want to open it up. Thoughts there from the panel?
Can I speak to one issue that I think Brendan is getting at? Is if everybody's using the same technology, nobody has a benefit. But I will suggest to you that one of the things that technology can do is create transparency on human behavior. And my prediction is that if a judge could look at what he or she has done and see the patterns of her rulings, and there's a certain way we react to being transparent, whether you're talking about police body cams or you're talking about Zoom. When I see what I look like on this camera and I say, oh my gosh, do I really look like that, right? We behave differently when the camera is on, and we're going to behave differently when these AI systems try to predict our behavior as judges. So they're going to influence, I think, the process. And instead of being predictive, they're going to influence judges and behavior in ways that I don't know that are necessarily good.
Joe, I think that would be a great panel sometime to talk from the judge's perspective of seeing their own analytics and whether or not they feel like that's representative. That's a great one, Bob. Anybody else, Todd or Roger?
No, I think that's exactly right. You answered the question as if I were more articulate, would have answered it, which is yes, it will. But I think that's good. Should ideally the lawyers not decide the disputes, and I think that's primarily in a litigation context, if I understood the question. So it's a good question, and it's certainly true. And as you said, small firms, and it's helping folks, maybe criminal defense lawyers, do a little better job. That was the particular example I used in the pro bono sense. It was on appeal, but it was a pro bono criminal defense matter up on appeal, and it helped her prevail and worked for her client.
Yeah, my experience, 38 years of litigation is really that when tools like that become available, the smaller firms can compete more readily with the bigger firms, and we can do justice for the client who couldn't afford unlimited sums of money to litigate.
Well, I don't have any other questions from the participants, but I have a few myself and want to really kind of probe on the wow factor. So Todd, that really kind of impacted me, the way that you articulated that, hey, listen, I haven't been super wowed by what I've experienced. And I think it goes back to me to a fundamental question about what is AI good for? So machine learning really takes vast amounts of data to be able to detect patterns, because that's what it's looking for, right? Roger, you shared that, and Todd and Bob all hit on that. And so when we think about the legal industry, my question is this: are we too closed off as an industry in order to have enough training data to really make AI viable for us? Thoughts there?
I don't think so. We are, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know whose side you're on, at least in the litigation sense. In Todd's area, you guys guard your stuff with like it's Fort Knox, right? This is my one precious super contract. But in litigation, everything is filed publicly. And to the extent that these computer systems have access to what is going on, we've got vast sums of data. Not just those reported in Westlaw, but in every single jurisdiction. And there are companies that are actually trying to digitize all of that information, get access to every single document, and then take that data and make hay with it. And I from a litigation standpoint, there's a lot that we can learn from AI. One area that is very difficult to kind of gauge, but would be extremely helpful, would be valuing damages, because we don't have access to settlement information. And in Ohio, we used to publish, to the extent somebody was willing to say how much a case settled for. We needed ways to put a value on the risk for our clients as litigators. And if we can take that information, and then we can do more than just lie to our clients. And when they ask us, what are the chances that we're going to win this case? Whenever I hear a lawyer say 67%, or, I think it's about 86, I just know, where are you getting that from, right? I always tell my clients, I don't know. What result do you want? And I'm going to try to get that for you. And I'm going to tell them whether they should settle or not settle as early in the game as possible. But it is now, technology allows us to really predict with greater accuracy than just our wealth of experience. because I'm no more confident 38 years after passing the bar than I was 2 or 3 years as to how a case is likely to go. So technology would
So
probably be a
maybe
better.
just to dovetail on that a bit, Bob, years ago at Vanderbilt University, I met a creator of Picture It Settled. Have you heard of that solution?
Mm-mm.
It's basically taking thousands and thousands of settlements, although you have to submit them in order to collect the training data. But that is the premise, was that in nearly what I can recall, nearly 2 steps away could tell you what your case would settle as. So I think that goes back to access to the information, and maybe just to play off of that, but Roger, Todd, thoughts here too, is that we deal mostly in what I call a big text problem. We have unstructured information. So we are already an industry that's behind structured data. So you saw Roger talk about Westlaw and using head notes that can try to surmise a case. But to what degree is that going to hurt us, because we, one, have to structure the data in order to take even more yardage out of it in some of these advanced technologies. So any thoughts on the industry as a whole being impacted by AI or the big text problem?
I'll reply real quickly on that, and then leave time for Todd as well. One thing that I think is interesting when I've ever talked to people that have run, data labs or done projects where it's not going after what is ultimately low-hanging fruit, which is, electronically filed documents structured in a similar way available for federal trial courts, which is pretty much all the other stuff. Most of the effort is in structuring the data and figuring out what's missing, and the analysis and the computational power that goes into it is trivial. And I think that that's really, to sort of back to your point of, are we too closed off? Well, I do think in a sense, our systems reveal only a certain kind of set of things that are easily accessible. And those are the things that people are solving the most. In Virginia, most of our court opinions aren't actually published. The higher level, the appellate and certainly Supreme Court ones, but trial court decisions are not. The general district court decisions are not. So those kind of things are unavailable, and to collect them and code them in this sense is a lot more effort than it is worth it. If what you're trying to do is, private commercial gain, either to create a product or to serve yourself. Todd, I don't know if you have other thoughts on that as well.
No, I mean, I think that's exactly right. And the way you put it, Catherine, is spot on if we think about it in a legal context or even a business transaction context. But that's where I'd sort of pivot and say, law means lots of different things. And it's really similar to what Bob was saying with the underlawyered or underrepresented, or one of the examples. So I can't imagine a situation where estate planning, and I'm not talking the legal Zoom simple will, but that's a universe where the facts you really need to know that are variable are easily provided on a questionnaire. And then you've got the estate planning considerations from federal and state tax law, which is a pretty closed system that AI ought to be able to incorporate and produce a much more intelligent system. And then really, and this is where I think it may be difficult, if not impossible, is the ethical boundaries of building that system that takes that one example and either anonymizes it or something so they can share that learning and start to build the more profound system. Because that's the wow that I was looking for, is, to go back to the AI first company book that, and I'm by no means a technologist. I just watch this stuff on TV. But, looking at this and just saying, no, we need to have a system where it's getting smarter and smarter and smarter. And I do think you've explained it well with that closed system. It's about as smart as you're going to get in a lot of these fields if it's litigation we're talking about. And that's where I get underwhelmed with the e-discovery. My own experience with that is that it's really, you're shifting more work to our junior associates and taking it off the plate of the legal clerks. So economically, it's a little bit cheaper for our clients. I'm not sure the work product's any better. The truth is, our law clerks were tremendously talented people who were very diligent, maybe a little bit slower, but I think probably certainly less of a black box than you're going to get from AI. And, contextually at least as intelligent as a good AI system.
Can I answer a question that somebody asked about building on this line of questioning? Somebody mentioned, well, what happens if we have insurance companies that provide settlement data anonymously? Would that help the situation? And I think missing from this conversation a little bit, not only is the access to justice, but what corporate America really has that they don't have an incentive to share, and they are using the very kind of technology because they're not lawyers, they're not bound by ethical rules in order to benefit. And I am sure that insurance companies analyze their data on settlements, down to every different particular jurisdiction, type of injury, type of lawsuit, in order to guide the judgment of their claims adjusters, right? And if you think about the hundreds of thousands of automobile accident claims that are settled every year, it's the big firm, not the big firm, but the plaintiffs' firms with 1,000 automobile cases that have a better idea about what an insurance company is likely to pay on a particular claim. But the insurance company itself has all of its data, right? And they develop techniques, settlement techniques based on that data. And so they are using AI, a machine to take the place of, claim supervisors and to analyze all of this data. It's there from our clients, and our clients understand how powerful AI is in putting in legal systems that help guide, streamline their operations. There's a whole new job category that's created a whole new profession called legal ops. And Catherine, you probably know all about this. And what is it? The corporate legal operations consortium now has tens of thousands of members, and they want law firms, they want to create an industry where you take advantage of every sophisticated legal system that you can, every process in order to do this. But the vast majority of lawyers in the academic world or in small practice, or even in private practice in the bigger firms, they don't have that same broad perspective to be able to see how to exploit AI for their clients. And because we rely so heavily on the billable hour, they don't necessarily have the incentive to learn to do something that Roger probably would be aghast at when I started 38 years ago. If I had to do a simple legal research memo, I spent 3 days in our law library, which was, as good as the county law library, and some client was paying me for 3 days worth of time, when now Westlaw can answer that same question in 30 seconds, right? And it's because we don't, until we're forced to use technology really to leverage our time responsibly and efficiently, we're just not going to do it. I'm not in that world anymore, not really. So I can say things like that without being blasphemous, but I'm talking to Catherine. Catherine, you got to stop doing that out there, babe.
Well, I think all good insights, and to some extent, I think that corporate clients kind of look to large law and say, listen, you guys have the most access to data. Look at all the clients you represent and all the variations, and do you have some level of responsibility there to help promote? So that could take us down a different road, but I am going to ask a question because I think this is a good one, and we have just a couple minutes left. So kind of looking for a quick react here, maybe a little bit of a provocative question. We're talking about artificial intelligence, but what the heck, it's the end of the day. The question is around work-life balance and practicing law. So I think there's a little bit of tension when we talk about technology. We talk about technology, boy, it could have some labor reduction, or are we using it to help enrich our lives, to help us do more meaningful things? So is there tension there? Is there a preference you think organizations are going to glean to? You think it's going to be more around labor reduction and it's a hidden message? Or do we think it's going to be more about enriching our lives and creating more work-life balance? Thoughts there?
It's actually one of my favorite subjects because I feel like if there's nothing we should have learned more from what's happened in Silicon Valley and really Facebook, all these unicorns and whatnot, is the tremendous power of young people to make a difference and to carve out lives that have satisfaction. That's actually how I came to have Bahar Ansari's picture there, because I view her as a success. She's been out of law school for 5 years. She developed 2 business models where she's able to earn a terrific living on her terms, her hours. She provides it. She's got the chat bot. She's able to be available, but she can also shut that down and automate it. So I do think there is that opportunity, but it requires that entrepreneurial zeal that she has. And, 5 years out of law school, I certainly wasn't thinking about a different way to do this. And I think this, to show my gray hair, I think this generation has it, and there is an opportunity, and that's the power of the superhero. The exoskeleton is giving them the ability to carve out, but it takes someone willing to insist, no, I'm going to find a path to allow me to have that, because I've for sure failed.
Yeah, I'll chime in briefly. First of all, on the superhero point, to Bob's message about insurance companies, it was Mr. Incredible that got fired for disclosing the settlement information, which his company didn't like. But then on the work-life balance thing, I think from what my experience and my sort of interest in supporting law students is, it's the entrepreneurial people who see that as a focus of wanting the balance that are going to benefit the most and have the greatest potential for looking to these sophisticated systems to give them the balance they need. And a couple of people that I've known that have chosen to go in the same direction as your example, Todd, have found a way that they can not work that much, but still make enough to have a good living. But full disclosure, Catherine, they're not working at big law. So I think, it's sort of a question of where do you want to end up, and are you in control of your own destiny or not? So I think there's potential for it. Yeah.
I'll be brief. Roger, I think you hit the nail on the head. Really, really what's going to make the difference is when you say, I'm going to innovate for my benefit, right? I'm going to innovate for my lifestyle and then fully use technology. And that's what I do when I teach my legal app development classes, is look for easier ways to leverage it, look for technology to help you find easier ways to deliver legal services more efficiently, more cheaply, and with less time, so you have more time to deal with it. And something as simple as a pandemic and gaining acceptance of Zoom saves us 2 hours a day. And one of the first, my first ventures as a legal tech person was to develop technology for the legal profession. Zoom-like technology 6, 7, 8 years ago, but nobody had any interest. Why would we want to do this? And now it's commonplace. Thank you.
Well, listen, it has been a pleasure working with all of you, Bob, Todd, and Roger, and Joe. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed the discussion even before we got on, but this was even more fun today. So I hope that everyone has a great afternoon, and thank you from this panel.
Thank you very much, guys. That was, I'm running out of superlatives, but I think that was a fabulous panel. Also very engaged. At this point, I want to just thank our sponsors, and I don't want to leave anybody out here. Our speakers too, Malco, Mid-American Association of Law Libraries Consortium, the Judge Ben C. Green Law Library, and Case Western Reserve School of Law. And regarding our speakers and panelists, Marcel Duhamel, Greg Kelly, Randy Diamond, Sue Workman, Bob Fernier, Mark Schultz, Catherine Lowry, who was our keynote and also led the last panel, Brian Ray, David Croft, Bob was on every other panel, Bob Fernier, Robert Mazzula, Masila, sorry. Let me see, Todd Northman, Roger Skalback, and then from yesterday, let me get this, bring it up just a real, okay. Mr. Fernier again, Kevin Ashley, Emily M. Janowski Halen, Heidi Cool, and again, Roger Skalback. So thank you so much. I'm incredibly grateful and just so happy that everybody, people were just so nice to me. And at this point, I want to turn it over to Eric Siller. Eric Siller, Martin Reska, and Sarah Jean Petit, the people behind the scenes who really helped this go, because without them, I can barely turn on Zoom. So thank you so much, everyone. Eric?
Okay, thank you, Joe. To earn 6 CLEs for this program, please complete the evaluation link. It's available in the chat box. The same link is also in your Zoom confirmation email. All evaluations must be completed by 4:35 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday, July 17. The activity code for this conference is 467092. Please allow 30 days for your CLEs to appear. Once again, the activity code is 467092. 467092, and the link to the evaluation is in the chat, and it's also in your confirmation email. I'll leave this information up for a little bit, and thank you all very much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.